Hello, everyone. Great to see you. We'll let folks all trickle in, I'm sure, but welcome to the Fraternal Order of Police contract teach-in hosted by Reclaim Philadelphia's Community Control Now campaign. Really appreciate you all joining us this evening. I'm Kabira Stokes. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm facilitating today with Caitlin.
Hey everyone, my name is Caitlin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in West Philly and I'm also from Philly originally. So I'm super excited to be co-hosting or co-facilitating today with Kabira. Thank you again, everyone, for coming out. We really appreciate it. We're both, me and Kabira are the co-chairs of the outreach group in the Reclaim's Community Control Now campaign, which is a part of the larger Mass Liberation Task Force at Reclaim Philly. Again, I'm just super excited to dig into this really important topic today with everyone. So I'll be more in the background, making sure the conversation runs smoothly and just to facilitate questions in the chat. I wanted to take a moment now just to invite everyone to introduce themselves in the chat. So if you just want to drop your name, your preferred pronouns, and maybe where you're tuning in from. And yes, as Katya mentioned in the chat, the teach-in is being recorded. So just keep that in mind in terms of if you prefer to have your camera on or off. Feel free to just introduce yourselves in the chat. And as you're doing that, I'll just mention a few housekeeping things. So obviously there's the chat button here at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can send the entire group a message or feel free to message me privately if you have any concerns or questions. We really want to encourage everyone to use the chat throughout to ask questions as we go. We really would love for this to be a forum for a community conversation versus us just kind of like presenting at you. We appreciate if as many people as possible are able to stay on camera, but we definitely understand if you prefer for any reason to keep it off, but just in terms of trying to facilitate a more connected virtual experience. And we also ask that just to minimize background noise if you're able to keep your mics muted. Lastly, I just wanted to let you know that today's teach-in presentation is also meant to be shared with the community as like an outreach tool. So if you are interested in having the teach-in done with your community group, or to use it in a different forum, definitely reach out and let us know, and I'll be sharing my contact information in the chat as well.
So, and welcome to those who are just coming in. All right, so some of you may know the city of Philadelphia is currently in contract negotiations with the Fraternal Order of Police. This contract is going to be finalized June 30th, and it usually lasts for a 3-year period, although there's a chance it might only be for 1 year. So today we're talking about who the Fraternal Order of Police are, what their contract is about, and why it needs to go. We're also going to talk through Reclaim Philadelphia's specific list of contract demands. Our ultimate goal is the abolition of police, prisons, and state surveillance. These demands are meant to reduce harm perpetrated by police and the FOP against Philadelphia's Black and Brown communities. And we hope to give everyone the tools they need to be a loud and powerful voice for transformative change during these negotiations, which are literally happening right now. There are some community agreements Caitlin will walk us through so that we treat each other with respect and create a safe space for this presentation.
Thanks. So it's always best practice just to establish community agreements, to ground ourselves and to know what's expected from us and what we should expect from others. So today we're going to be talking, as Kabira said, obviously about the police contract, and we'll be touching on some of the prevalent issues within the police system overall. So in order just to create a kind of like welcoming, safe space, I ask that we respect other people's experiences and ideas. We have all lived different lives, and our lived experience is what shapes our perspectives. Assume the best intentions. We can't be articulate all of the time, so giving the benefit of the doubt and asking questions is always welcome. Confidentiality. So of course, we hope and expect that you share the information that you learn here today, that any personal experiences shared, please that and remain with us today. And yeah, again, there are no bad or wrong questions. We're all learning as we go. And lastly, just to be conscious of intent versus impact. So no matter your intention, you know, we are all responsible for the impact of that. So leaning into discomfort also finally is important in how we grow. So yeah, just really want to have a generative discussion. And then I'll quickly just review the agenda. So first we're going to take a look at how the Community Control Now campaign began. Then we'll go over who the Fraternal Order of Police are. We'll go over our campaign demands and then discuss what grievance and arbitration is. And then lastly, we'll review the police contract negotiation process and share some actions that you can partake in today.
Okay, so, I just want to say before we begin, this is incredibly wonky stuff. It's dense. It is purposefully confusing. We have not had a light shown upon this. This has been undercover, back room, cigars, white men, the whole thing. And because of the work of Reclaim Philadelphia and others around the city, we finally got to look at this contract this year. And so this, I guess we just sort of ask your patience. We're learning this too, and this is presenting it to you is new. It might be confusing. It's meant to be that way. If you have questions, please ask them. We want to make sure that you get what we're talking about here, because this is literally how the police gets funded. Like, this is what it is, and we're not going to be able to change it until we understand it. So again, very much appreciate you being here to learn this with us. Okay, so why community control now? Go back to the 2020 uprisings. Protests around the nation, around the world, called to defund the police after the murder of George Floyd. Protesters, particularly here in Philly, were met with police violence, usually only experienced by civilians in Black, brown, and poor communities. So lots of folks got to feel what many folks have felt for a long time. Advocates have been calling to reform, defund, and or abolish the police for years, and police unions and their contracts have been one major barrier. And we're going to play a little video which will dig into this a little further.
In 2020, we've seen vital conversations about the future of policing in this country enter the mainstream in a major way.
People are asking questions about policing.
There's been a lot of talk about defunding, dismantling, or abolishing the police.
There won't be defunding, there won't be dismantling of our police.
Large audiences are now finally listening to advocates who've been calling out the power and abuse of police for years. One important and complicated part of that conversation is about police unions. Case in point, police unions aren't just fighting for higher wages for their workers. They also effectively protect their members so that they aren't held accountable for their misconduct on the job. A 2017 investigation by the Washington Post found that of the over 1,800 officers fired for misconduct from the country's largest police departments in the last decade, roughly 25% got their jobs back due to appeals mandated by union contracts. A DC officer who was convicted of sexually assaulting a 19-year-old woman in his cop car and a Florida officer who shot and killed an unarmed man were among those reinstated. Research conducted by the Racial Uprisings Lab also found that when officers were unionized, the amount of civilian killings increased in a substantial way. And in a country where police are 3 times as likely to kill a Black person than a white person, that's just the tip of the problematic iceberg. In a letter written to union members, the president of the Minneapolis Police Union, Lieutenant Bob Kroll, both villainized George Floyd and defended the 4 officers who were charged in his death. And he's certainly not the first high-ranking police official to make racist statements. The Fraternal Order of Police is the nation's largest police union and has over 350,000 members and approximately 2,000 local chapters. Back in 2017, Philly's FOP president referred to Black Lives Matter activists as rabid animals, and the former Miami FOP union president called Tamir Rice a thug.
Where labor unions empower working people, police unions disempower working people, because what they do is they break up strikes, they break up opportunities for people to organize. They have disproportionately used violence against Black people, and they disproportionately use violence against poor people. If the labor union movement wants to continue to have its credibility in communities of color, they need to expel police unions. You cannot have a directly racist, hostile organization in your movement and call yourself a movement that's going to be open to Black people or people of color.
Police unions are powerful. They put their money where their mouth is in order to exert political control and block reform from ever potentially happening. Back in February, a New York police union blamed Mayor Bill de Blasio after 2 NYPD officers were shot and even declared war on him. During many of the 2020 uprisings, we saw police engage in horrific acts of brutality, like tear gassing demonstrators and running people over. As protesters filmed the assaults and called out this violence for what it is, dozens of cops across the nation resigned rather than address the nature of their tactics. So that's why the words policing, reform, and safety don't go hand in hand, especially for Black communities.
The ability for these police unions to shield officers from accountability has a direct correlation to the amount of violence police engage in. If we were to take those rights away, I am very clear that those incidents of violence would drop right away, and that would make society much better off. So so the answer is assertively yes. That should be really a minimum. I personally argue that police unions are not, it's like jumbo shrimp, they're not really unions. They're organizations that have done a lot of wickedness in society, and they should be abolished.
The strength of America's police unions is finally coming under scrutiny to the masses, and one resounding and popular message is that it's time for them to go. If police unions continue to have as much power as they currently do, then any sort of meaningful change will never happen in this country. And that is what's got to change.
Right on. So let's learn about them in Philly. Okay, so here in Philly, the Fraternal Order of
In
Police.
2020, we've seen vital.
Okay, so the FOP, it's a membership organization. It represents the interest of law enforcement officers. If we can, yep, perfect. Okay, so for decades, the Philadelphia Police Department has served as an occupying force meant to surveil, harass, displace, and incarcerate the Black, Latinx, and poor communities of Philadelphia. Instead of making our communities safer, the impact of the PPD has left our communities grieving. And many of the resources available to the PPD have been obtained because of the amount of power the Fraternal Order of Police has. The FOP is not a union. Interestingly, when the FOP was established in 1915, they deliberately decided not to establish a union due to an anti-union sentiment. In general, law enforcement is not supportive of organized labor and have often been used as strikebreakers. Fraternal organizations are not subject to the reporting and restrictions of other labor unions. Member counts, cost of dues, investments, and other requirements that other labor unions must report to the Federal Office of Labor Management Standards don't apply to the FOP. Because the police are not allowed to strike since they're allegedly necessary to maintain public safety, they instead have the option to submit the matter to arbitration, which consistently works in the favor of the FOP, and we'll get more into that later. So while there are many obstacles in our fight to defund and ultimately abolish the police, it has become very clear that FOP contracts, both in Philly and around the country, are a huge barrier to any progress. For too long, the Philly Police Department has been able to negotiate for more resources and more limited disciplinary procedures through their contract emboldening police officers to perpetuate violence in our communities and even within their own ranks. The FOP gets most of its power by exploiting state level legislation. And as negotiations continue between the city and the Fraternal Order of Police, we must put pressure on city leadership. So I'm going to tell you about the changes to the contract that we are demanding, and I'm also going to touch briefly on our demands for a new oversight commission. Note that our entire list of demands can be found on Reclaim's website and will be posted in the chat. Our demands are in alignment with our partner organizations, many of whom have demands of their own. These demands do not mean that we accept the Philadelphia Police Department to still exist, but they will reduce the harm that it does to the residents of Philly, especially Black and Brown communities. We want investment in community, police accountability, defunding the police, and abolition of both the police and prisons. And I'm not going to go into detail about every single demand, or we'd be here all night, but I will describe some general themes. So number one is transparency. Transparency is needed to expose the many Philly Police Department processes that have been kept secret. The current contract is intentionally unclear. Even the Police Advisory Commission cannot obligate the PPD to hand over documents or get an interview with an officer in order to perform an investigation. The contract has also been historically hidden from the public and is not easy to find. Equally as hidden is the contract negotiation process between the city and the FOP. Last November, after pressure from our organizing, Philadelphia hosted its first ever public hearing of the FOP contract. And even though the FOP filed a lawsuit to try to stop it from happening, just for the public to know what it was, dozens of our neighbors shared their stories of police brutality, spoke about frustration with the contract negotiation process, and demanded massive change. Police disciplinary records are generally exempt from disclosure under Pennsylvania's right to know law, and online complaint records that the city does make available are heavily redacted and anonymized, allowing cops who should not be on the street to continue their wrongdoing. As we mentioned earlier, fraternal organizations are not required to report member counts, cost of dues, or things like investments, making this information almost impossible to find. And lastly, grievance arbitrators, who play an important role in disciplining officers, are chosen by the PPD and FOP during the arbitration process, but nothing else is known about them. It's easy to guess that these, quote, neutral civilians have biases towards police, and the information we'll talk about later shows that that is exactly right. Okay, so complaint to discipline. This is how it works. When somebody complains about the police, like if I were to do it, the complaint goes to internal affairs. What that means is that the police investigate and discipline each other. I complain about the police investigates it. This allows them to avoid any real accountability, and has for obviously forever. To show how much control the police has over its own discipline, we're going to walk through the steps it takes for discipline to be rendered. Go back one second. So citizen files a complaint about the cop, PPD's Internal Affairs Division conducts an investigation, and then any allegations that are sustained are given to the Police Board of Inquiry, and that's when disciplinary recommendations are made. So after that process has gone through, you can go to the next slide. 5,296 complaints were filed against officers since 2013, including things like physical abuse, verbal abuse, criminal allegation, and more. Those complaints resulted in a bit over 11,000 disciplinary investigations. So pop quiz, of those 11,313 investigations, what percentage resulted in a guilty finding? Show me in the chat what you think it is. A, 2%, B, 7%, C, 16%, D, 23%. 2%, 7%, 16%, 23%. What do you think? I see a 2%. And there's also a question. I heard the majority of FOP members are retired officers. how can current officers who might oppose the FOP get hurt? That's a great question. I think we can note that for later. So most folks are saying 2%, and the answer is 2% milk. Thank you, Robert. That is exactly right. So just 1,810, which is 16% of investigations, have resulted in a sustained finding, which is when internal affairs have determined that one or more allegations filed in a complaint were supported, or another violation was discovered during their investigation. And just 2% have resulted in a guilty finding by the Police Board of Inquiry, and that's who hands out discipline to officers. And many of those violations are wiped off a cop's record after a certain amount of time has passed. An analysis of the Philly police complaints by Sam Lerner, using data from the City of Philadelphia's open data portal and Philly Declaration's Police Accountability Project, found that the most important factor in determining if an investigation resulted in a guilty finding was, surprise, surprise, whether or not the accused officer was white, followed by whether or not the complaint was Black. So we want cops to face real consequences for their actions. Those 2% of complaints against police resulting in discipline, and that's just cases where people filed a formal complaint against the officer. We need people who are not the police to investigate these crimes. We demand that officers no longer be allowed to use vacation time when suspended. We demand that the FOP no longer be allowed to use city money for legal matters. We shouldn't be paying the police to carry out violence and then turn around and pay for their legal defense as well. Currently, it is very easy for an officer to commit very serious offenses and just get a slap on the wrist. So we've created a list of offenses that must immediately result in an officer being fired. Those include use of excessive force, especially when it results in death, failure to stop or attempt to stop an officer using excessive force, sexual harassment, assault, and intimidation, failing to provide for safety of civilian in police custody, think about Freddie Gray, display of any racist or white supremacist symbols, including tattoos, openly supporting white supremacist ideology, or knowingly associating with white supremacists, neo-Nazi, or any other racist groups. I'm just curious, throw it in the chat, can anyone think of another occupation where someone can carry out behavior like this, what I just described, and not be fired? I don't think I can think of another one. If you have any thoughts, drop it in. Yeah, I can. All right, we can move on to, well, yeah, only the US military. And you know, I think that there's a connection between the police is another occupying force and the president. Yeah, he who shall not be named. Okay, so thanks for still being with me. This is dense stuff, but this is the real stuff. Ooh, Rose, ouch, right, that whole crew. Okay, we're gonna move on to arbitration. So let's say that a cop's fellow officers determined that that cop has done something wrong and recommended punishment, and the police commissioner hands down that discipline. The crown jewel of the labor contract is a concession the police have won called grievance arbitration. So grievance arbitration picks up after the Police Board of Inquiry recommends a disciplinary action to the police commissioner. The commissioner can accept or reject that action, but either way, the officer can file a grievance, essentially a complaint, against the punishment. The officer's FOP obtained lawyer and the police department can negotiate to settle. The cases typically start the process of arbitration. So together, the police department and the officer's representatives select a, quote, neutral civilian arbitrator to serve like a judge in a new hearing. This new hearing starts from scratch, throwing out the conclusions of the Police Board of Inquiry and giving the arbitrator complete control over discipline. So here's a trivia question. When officers have been charged with crimes that any ordinary person would be in jail for, stalking, assault, more, grievance arbitration offers protection. Now we want you to guess from these options, which charge has been reduced or overturned from the arbitration process? A, burglary, B, narcotics, C, squad corruption, D, domestic violence, E, false statement while testifying, or F, all of the above. Burglary, narcotics, squad corruption, domestic violence, false statement while testifying, all of the above. All of the above, the Fs have it. That is true. It's all of them. Okay. So here you can see even some more situations where grievance arbitration provided zero accountability for officers who break the law. And in fact, the FOP has successfully fought to have police discipline overturned or reduced about 70% of the time. So that's actually just 70% of that 2%. This information was not easily available to the public, by the way, and had to be requested by journalists with the right to know request. The whole point of the internal affairs and the refusal to disclose material to the Police Advisory Commission is that the Philadelphia Police Department claims they can't be judged by civilians who don't understand police work. This principle goes out the window when it comes to a civilian arbitrator who's willing to override discipline. Police are allowed to use arbitration if they are about to face discipline for their violent and/or illegal behavior. Grievance arbitration was granted by a state law called Act 111 in the late 60s. It's still in place. Only 2% of the officers who've had cases go through this process have ever been disciplined. Okay, so in November, we're going to talk about Police Oversight Commission. In November, Philadelphians voted to establish a new Citizens Police Oversight Commission. We must ensure that the new commission is more effective than the current Police Advisory Commission. This new Oversight Commission must, A, have community participation in the selection of the board, be fully funded at least 3% of the budget from the PPD budget, have progressive fines for failing to comply with the Citizen Police Oversight Commission, have the power to discipline the police, and not have any current or former cops on the board. Community review boards or oversight commissions that have not proven to lessen police misconduct against community members. For example, New York City established its review board in the early 90s, but infamous cases of police violence continued, like Amadou Diallo in 1999, Eric Garner in 2014. Our demands for the Philadelphia Citizens Police Oversight Commission are for harm reduction for our community while we continue to work towards police abolition. So how is the contract negotiated? The Kenney administration has been negotiating the FOP contract every 3 years. It was supposed to be negotiated this past winter and spring, but the police labor representative, the Fraternal Order of Police, and the city agreed to a 1-year extension of the previous contract. The contract is mainly negotiated between the mayor's office and the FOP, and you know who the mayor is. We voted him in. We can vote him out. He's term limited. This is his last term, but he's now facing serious questions of legacy and higher office. The mayor's primary agent in this matter is Deputy Mayor Rich Laser and the Office of Labor. When it comes to these appointed officials, we can lobby them directly, and we do. We can have meetings with them to educate them about the issues. We can call their office to make sure our values and demands are heard and respected. We've been talking with Rich Laser as he sets priorities during the process, but we need to continue to pay attention and keep up the pressure as his office negotiates with the FOP. The FOP has been at this for a long time. These folks are well-funded because we pay them handsomely, well-organized, and aggressive. And though City Council does not have a say in the police contract negotiation, they do control the police department's budget. So we need to keep meeting with them and putting the pressure on them to make cuts to the Philadelphia Police Department budget whenever possible. So how are we going to take action? It's time. So make sure you sign into the Reclaim Philadelphia budget demands, which includes no more money for the police department. Budgets are moral documents, and we need to make sure that Philadelphia prioritizes people and community over corporations in the carceral system. So click the link in the chat to sign on. Second, we invite you to the Mass Liberation Q2 in-person meeting this Saturday, June 12th from 2 to 3:30 at Norris Square Park. You can learn about the other campaigns with the task force and the amazing work being done for mass liberation. And again, the sign-up link will be in the chat. And then last but not least, join our team. We are volunteers. We do have 2 amazing organizers, but this is a lot of volunteers doing this work. We always need more. Fill out the Google form in the short link in the chat And Matt or Rand, who are on the call, will reach out to you to plug in into the Community Control Now campaign. Be sure to let Matt or Rand know you're interested in participating in our rapid response phones apps. We had one this morning. We called all the city council members regarding the vote about the budget. No more money for the police, no money for tasers, et cetera. And then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Reclaim Philadelphia and on Twitter at Reclaim Phila to keep up to date on direct actions and on future community control events. And I think so. Sorry, thanks for joining us. I just want to say this FOP contract teach-in, it's meant to be shared with community. If you want to share it with yours, please let us know.